Judge Williams thought he was dealing with a clueless teenager, but what happened next left the courtroom in stunned silence. The defendant didn't just defend himself, he dismantled the case like an experienced lawyer, piece by piece, exposing flaws no one had ever imagined. The air in the Los Angeles County Courthouse felt heavy, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Rows of spectators filled the gallery, their murmurs growing louder by the second. And yet amidst all the chaos, the defendant's table seemed too big for the young man standing beside it. With his hands in his pockets and his chin slightly raised, showing just enough confidence to prove he wasn't afraid. Ethan Thompson, 19. Accused of grand theft auto and resisting arrest. The charges were serious, but Judge Williams' expression made it clear he wasn't worried about the law. He was more concerned with what he thought would be a routine, straightforward case. What he didn't know was that Ethan was about to show him just how wrong he was. Judge Williams leaned back in his chair, drumming his fingers lazily against the polished wood of his desk. He peered over the top of his glasses, lips twisting into something between a smirk and a sneer. "You think you're some kind of legal expert, don't you?" His voice cut through the air, dry and sarcastic like a blade. "This isn't a debate club, kid." A few laughs rippled through the courtroom. The bailiff, the stenographer, even the prosecutor, all were in on the joke. But Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't laugh. He wasn't here to amuse anyone. This wasn't his first rodeo. He'd spent years preparing for this moment. Not exactly this one, but something close. While other kids spent their time memorizing sports stats, Ethan memorized case law. While his friends played video games, he played out mock trials in his head, arguing cases with himself. His mother, Emily Thompson, had worked as a paralegal for over 20 years. Ethan grew up hearing her stories about how prosecutors cut corners, how judges played favorites, and how some defense attorneys barely even tried. He absorbed every detail, and by the time he was 14 he could break down a trial better than most law students. But to Judge Williams, Ethan was just another troublemaker. "Let's make this quick," he said, flipping open the case file. "I've got a golf game at 2. The audience chuckled again, but this time, the atmosphere shifted. Ethan's lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smirk. Judge Williams had just made his first mistake, and no one, not even the judge, had noticed yet. Prosecutor David Price rose from his seat, his air of confidence so thick it could suffocate anyone standing too close. His suit was sharp, his tie perfectly knotted, and his voice smooth, like he had delivered the same speech 100 times. "Your Honor, the state will prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the defendant, Ethan Thompson, was caught red-handed in a stolen vehicle. A 2022 Audi DA6 reported missing just hours before his arrest. Officers chased him through downtown where he allegedly tried to flee before being apprehended. His fingerprints were found on the steering wheel. The prosecution submits that the evidence speaks for itself." The gallery shifted, whispers flowing like a river through the courtroom. On the surface it sounded damning. A stolen car, a chase, an arrest. Judge Williams glanced at Ethan over the rim of his glasses, then turned back to Price. "Go on." The prosecutor stepped toward the jury box, his shoes clicking loudly against the floor. "The defense will try to convince you that this was all a misunderstanding, that Ethan is a victim of circumstance. But let's be honest. What kind of victim runs from the police?" The tension in the room thickened. Judge Williams leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. Ethan didn't blink. Price continued flipping through papers. "Your Honor, I have here the testimony of Officer Michael Clark, who personally witnessed the defendant behind the wheel before he attempted to flee. The car was confirmed stolen. The arrest was made by the book." Judge Williams exhaled through his nose, nodding. "Sounds straightforward to me. And for most people in the room, it probably did. A stolen car, a chase, an arrest." Ethan knew better. He had spent too many years studying the ins and outs of trials, the way prosecutors and defense attorneys operate. But still, he stayed silent, watching, waiting. Judge Williams tapped his gavel lightly. "All right, let's hear the defense's response." He turned to Ethan's lawyer, a public defender named Olivia Green, who had barely spoken since stepping into the courtroom. She stood up, visibly nervous. "Your Honor, my client, Ethan." Ethan placed a hand on her arm. a silent request. She hesitated, then sat back down. For the first time Ethan spoke. "I'll be representing myself, Your Honor." The courtroom went completely silent. Judge Williams stared at him, clearly amused. "You're what?" Ethan's voice was calm, steady. "I'll be defending myself." A murmur rippled through the room. The bailiff's eyebrows shot up, and Price smirked, just for a second before he let out a sharp, mocking laugh. This should be interesting. But no one was laughing when Ethan stepped forward. The entire room held its breath. Everything was about to change. The weight of the courtroom settled around Ethan. His hands remained in his pockets, and he let the silence stretch long enough to make them uncomfortable. Then finally, he spoke. "Your Honor, before I begin, I'd like to confirm something with the prosecution." Price raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms. "Go ahead." Ethan took a slow step forward. "You said Officer Michael Clark personally saw me behind the wheel before I was arrested." "Correct, and that testimony is written in his report." "Of course it is." Ethan nodded, then turned to Judge Williams. "Your Honor, I move to dismiss that testimony as evidence." Judge Williams squinted at him. "On what grounds?" Ethan stepped forward, his voice low, but every word cutting through the tension. "Officer Clark never saw me in that car. In fact, he wasn't even on duty when the chase began." A flicker of confusion crossed Price's face. "What are you talking about?" Ethan took another step forward, his voice steady. "Your Honor, if the court allows me, I'd like to verify Officer Clark's GPS logs from that night. If his report says he witnessed me in the vehicle, then it should match his location history. But I have a feeling it won't." The murmurs in the gallery grew louder, but Judge Williams frowned, glancing toward Price. "Counselor?" Price cleared his throat, jaw tightening. "That report was filed by an officer of the law." "Your Honor, are we really going to take the word of a defendant over a trained professional?" Ethan gave a small, almost casual shrug. "If the officer was where he claimed to be, then the GPS data will prove it. But if he wasn't," he let the sentence hang in the air. Judge Williams studied him for a long moment, then turned to Price. "Does the prosecution have any objection to verifying the officer's GPS logs?" Price hesitated. The pause was just long enough for everyone in the courtroom to notice. The gallery noticed. Judge Williams noticed. Ethan took a quiet breath. He knew, if Price was so confident in his case, he wouldn't be stalling. Judge Williams sighed and rubbed his temple. "Counselor." Price finally shook his head. "No objections, Your Honor." The shift had begun. For the first time, the courtroom wasn't laughing anymore. The tension was palpable. Price shuffled his papers, his confident facade cracking. "Your Honor, while we wait for the GPS records, the fact remains that the defendant's fingerprints were found on the steering wheel of the stolen vehicle." Ethan nodded, but he wasn't done yet. "Let's talk about that evidence for a second." Judge Williams raised an eyebrow, gesturing for him to continue. Ethan turned to the jury, making eye contact with each one of them. "The prosecution wants you to believe that finding my fingerprints in a car means I stole it. That's the story they're selling. But let's think about this logically." He took a deep breath. "Let's say you walk into a department store and try on a jacket. You put your hands in the pockets, maybe zip it up, then put it back on the rack and walk out. A few hours later, someone shoplifts that jacket. Would the fact that your fingerprints are on it mean you stole it?" The jurors exchanged glances. A few murmured under their breath. Ethan pressed on. "The car in question was parked outside a 7-Eleven hours before the alleged theft. I was inside that store with 3 friends. Yes, I leaned against the car. I even opened the door because it was unlocked, but I didn't steal it." He let that sit for a moment before his voice sliced through the silence like a blade. "Does touching something make you a criminal?" Price cleared his throat, flipping through his notes in a desperate attempt to regain control. But Ethan wasn't done. "While we're on the topic, let's talk about how that fingerprint analysis was done." He turned to Judge Williams. "Was the forensic specialist subpoenaed to testify?" Judge Williams blinked, caught off guard. He glanced at Price. The prosecutor hesitated. Then reluctantly, "No." Ethan's lips pressed together. "So let me get this straight. The state is using forensic evidence to convict me, but they didn't think it was necessary to bring in the actual specialist who processed that evidence." No chance for me to cross-examine, to challenge the chain of custody, or the accuracy of the analysis. Price's jaw tightened, but Ethan wasn't done. Interesting, he said, as the tension in the courtroom hit a breaking point. Judge Williams sighed, rubbing his forehead. This was no longer a routine case. Ethan wasn't finished. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence an official statement from the owner of the vehicle. Judge Williams frowned. The owner? Ethan nodded. Yes, Mr. Ryan Bennett, the registered owner of the stolen Audi, provided a statement that was conveniently never submitted in the prosecution's filings. He turned to Price, whose face now looked flushed. Do you recall what Mr. Bennett told officers the night his car was reported stolen? Price stiffened, but Ethan didn't wait for him to answer. Instead, he read aloud from the transcript. I left my car running when I ran inside the gas station. Some kid must have jumped in and taken off, but it wasn't the guy you arrested. I saw the kid. He was white. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Ethan held the paper up. That's from the original police report, the same report Price conveniently ignored. He turned back to Judge Williams. The arresting officer omitted this. The prosecution ignored it. And yet they want this jury to believe I'm guilty. Price stepped forward, scrambling. Your Honor, this is irrelevant. But Ethan shook his head. No, I wasn't, he said, his voice not rising, but cutting through the room with the precision of a scalpel. I was arrested blocks away, walking home after getting snacks with my friends. I wasn't in the car. I wasn't near the car. I wasn't running from anything. The only thing tying me to this case is bad police work and assumptions. Judge Williams exhaled sharply, rubbing his forehead. This case was unraveling, and everyone knew it. Ethan turned back to the jury. The real suspect got away that night. The officers found a black kid in the same area, and decided that was close enough. That's what this case is really about. Silence. Judge Williams cleared his throat, and adjusted his glasses. Does the prosecution have anything further? Price was stiff, his face flushed. No, Your Honor. Judge Williams exhaled, his gaze fixed on Ethan. Finally, he leaned forward, his voice cutting through the courtroom. Case dismissed. A stunned silence filled the room. Then chaos. Half the courtroom erupted, some in disbelief, others in quiet relief. The gallery stirred, reporters scribbling in their notebooks. Ethan didn't move right away. He let the moment settle. Judge Williams stared at him, his expression unreadable. But there was something new in his eyes. Recognition. Maybe even regret. Ethan met his gaze, then turned to leave. But just as he reached the door, Judge Williams spoke again. Mr. Thompson. Ethan stopped but didn't turn. Williams hesitated. Then finally he said, You should consider law school. Ethan smirked. He didn't need to consider it. He was already on his way out of the courthouse. The reporters swarmed the steps, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward like weapons. Ethan, did you know the judge would dismiss the case? What's next for you? How does it feel to outmaneuver a seasoned prosecutor? Ethan pulled his hoodie over his head, ignoring the questions. He wasn't interested in the spectacle. This wasn't about proving how smart he was. It was about something bigger. His mother Emily was waiting at the bottom of the steps, arms crossed, her face unreadable. Boy, you scared me, she said, half to death. Ethan chuckled, scratching the back of his head. Had to take a risk, Ma. She stared at him for a moment, then pulled him into a tight hug. You always were the stubborn one. The cameras kept flashing, but Ethan wasn't paying attention anymore. Across the street, standing by his car, Judge Williams watched. His posture was different now. The arrogance was gone. His expression wasn't amused anymore. It was something else, something closer to reflection. He hadn't expected this case to be anything more than routine. Just another day. Another defendant. Another guilty plea. But now he knew he'd remember this one. Ethan had done something most people never could. He made the system look at itself, and for once it blinked first.